I'm Dominic Gates, aerospace reporter for the Seattle Times. I've been intensively covering the Boeing 737 MAX crisis following fatal crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia. IAmA a week after the Lion Air crash last October, Boeing issued a service bulletin to all airlines operating the MAX that identified a new flight control system on the airplane, known as MCAS, that had erroneously activated on the Lion Air flight due to a faulty sensor. My stories quickly focused on the potential design flaws in this system. By January, I was following leads that indicated the certification of this system had been deeply troubled. In early March, I asked Boeing for comment on the details of a story that laid out how Boeing had done the certification work on the MCAS system and identified serious flaws in its safety analysis. 4 days later, the second plane crashed in Ethiopia. Soon it was clear that the trajectory of that flight was similar to the Lion Air flight, with MCAS again erroneously triggered by the same faulty sensor. Within days the MAX was grounded around the world, with the FAA the last major regulator to fall in line. My Seattle Times colleagues and I followed up with stories on the victims of the Ethiopian crash, on the baffling decision to design the system so that it was activated by a single angle of attack sensor, on why the emergency instructions Boeing issued after the Lion Air crash failed to save the Ethiopian airliner, and about how the current FAA safety chief, working to placate industry, pushed more delegation of oversight to Boeing. We continue to work on follow-up pieces, with all the stories collected here on our 737 MAX page proof. https://1u4001gz3u21.jpg//1u401gz3u21.dash edit. Time's up. I have to get back to work. Thanks everyone for the questions. Falcon Jet Captain says, is there any documented cases of the same AOA failure happening to other aircraft other than these two? Seattle to Newsroom replies, AOA failures happen on other aircraft. It's not common, but it happens. It's not generally fatal. What we have here is a critical flight control system dependent on one specific AOA sensor.
Bruce City Chaser says, what are some of common myths that are surrounding this story right now?
Seattle to Newsroom replies, I wouldn't say it's a myth, but one narrative that has gained ground on social media is that because Boeing added this software flight control that the MAX must be an inherently unstable airframe and that Boeing merely slapped a software band-aid on it. In other words, this plane is doomed to fail, and X200B. I don't believe this is true. Using software to adjust the flight characteristics of a modern jet is not unusual. When Boeing flight tested the latest version of its 747 jumbo jet, the 747-8, it found wing flutter, excessive vibration caused by resonance, in certain flight conditions. A Boeing engineer called P.O. Fitzgerald won Engineer of the Year when he came up with a fix. The fix was software that detected the slightest onset of flutter on the wings and made the flaps and ailerons move slightly to counter it. Problem solved. No hardware, just software. There's nothing unstable about the 747.
Cherokee 6 says the New York Times published a damning article about 787 production in Charleston. Are you aware of similar issues in Renton or Everett?
Seattle to Newsroom replies, I've written about concerns over changes Boeing is making to its quality assurance system, including reducing the number of quality inspectors. This has caused concern not only about jobs but about the quality of the oversight. See these two stories. https://www.seattleTimes.com/Boeing-aerospace/Boeing-over-haul-its-quality-control-more-high-tech-tracking-but-fewer-inspectors-question-following-quality-control-audit/.
Too much damn salt, says Hi Dominic. To what extent do you feel this is a regulatory issue? That is, the regulatory system enabled the flaws in training, certification, software testing, etc.? Are there other changes to Boeing planes that have been those similar light touch regulation that should be revisited in light of this?
Seattle to Messnius Room replies, I believe these crashes highlight serious regulatory shortcomings. In the past 10 years, 2 new Boeing airplanes have entered service, the 787 Dreamliner and the 737 Maximum. Both were grounded for safety issues and AMP X200B. The Dreamliner was grounded for 3.5 months in 2013 after in-flight incidents of smoking, overheated batteries. No one died. Still, this was very serious. How were those batteries certified and approved safe and AMP X200B? Now we have the MAX grounded, and the big question is, how was this MCAS system certified and approved safe? Something is wrong when 2 new airplanes have to be grounded and Boeing's next new airplane, the 777X, is lined up in Everett almost ready for its first flight. Sneaky Detective says, hi Dominic. I've been reading your work and it has been outstanding. Here is a question that puzzles me. For the entire MAX family, why couldn't Boeing utilize the newly designed telescoping main landing gear of the 737 MAX 10, which extends 9.5 longer than the same gear on the MAX 8/9? Perhaps this additional ground clearance would have allowed the LEAP engines to be located back underneath the wings where the NG's engines were, thus mitigating the pitch-up effect to a large degree. Seattle to Messnius Room replies, I don't know the answer.
Satgui 3 Lux 14,159 says media has mentioned that Boeing was tasked with some elements of what is being called self-certification with some elements of the 737 MAX 8 certification process. During the testing Boeing would have been doing for this, would there be individuals with the FAA on the team performing the tests doing oversight? Or would the self-certification team be made entirely of company personnel?
Seattle to Messnius Room replies, there would have been FAA pilots on some of the MAX flight tests and AMP X200B. However, for the safety and compliance analyses, these were done almost entirely by Boeing engineers, the real subject matter experts. Their evaluations were sent to the FAA when finished for sign-off and AMP X200B. However, as my the 17th of March story related, many of the FAA safety engineers felt under constant pressure and often felt they were not given enough time to do proper assessments of the Boeing documents.
AF 1410 says Eva heard conflicting information as to whether or not the Ethiopian flight crew actually followed the correct procedures to regain control of the airplane.
Seattle to Messnius Room replies, it looks to me from the flight track data that the Ethiopian crew realized MCAS was causing the nose-down movement and because of the Lion Air crash knew that they must now use the runaway stabilizer checklist. Unfortunately, it looks like they jumped the gun and skipped a step, going immediately to hit the cutout switches that stopped the uncommanded and indeed all electrical power to the tail. That stopped MCAS, but they were now required to move the tail manually using the stab trim wheel. That proved impossible to budge because the stabilizer was in the MAX nose down position and they were pulling on the yoke putting the elevator in MAX nose up position and these forces jammed against each other, locking the system. They should have used the thumb switches to move the stabilizer and ease those forces before the cutout. However, I don't blame the pilots for this sequence. The instructions Boeing had provided following the first crash did not tell them that it was critical to ease the stabilizer back up before hitting the cutoff and AMP X200B. The above is based on what the flight data looks like. There is much more going on in the cockpit, not all of which we know the details of, but I think the above account is why, despite trying to follow Boeing's checklist, they still failed to save Tejet.
G.G. Allen's micro penis says, are any of these planes still flying right now, or are they all grounded without exception?
Seattle to Messnius Room replies, they can be flown without passengers to be positioned for storage. And Boeing has flown 135 plus test flights of MAXes with the new software update installed.
KU7 Canadian dollars says, will this drive real change to the FAA and the BCO?
Seattle to Messnius Room replies, I hope so.
EFISK 666 says, in terms of executive responsibility, the second accident is much more troubling than the first. The first accident was the result of a serious engineering design mistake, but that can dealt with by apologizing and compensating victims and changing processes and designs going forward. The second accident was caused by somebody high up the chain at Boeing choosing to ignore safety issues and keep the plane flying. and the workaround they published apparently didn't even actually work in real-world conditions. Manual override wasn't physically possible at flight speeds. So, questions. Was the workaround to the MCAS issue ever tested in a real flight? And if so, why didn't they see the problems that happened at Ethiopian Airlines? Second, which executive at Boeing is responsible for keeping the plane flying after the first accident, and can they be held criminally responsible?
Seattle to Mess Newsroom replies, I believe it's true that Boeing bears some heavy responsibility for the second accident, but not in the way you frame it. Boeing believed that by telling every MAX pilot in the world about MCAS and about how to handle any recurrence of what happened to the Lion Air pilots, using the stabilizer runaway checklist, that the plane would then be perfectly safe. In that case, there was no need to ground the fleet. Where Boeing seems to have erred badly is in not providing more detail about that checklist. The instructions failed to warn pilots of the potential scenario that the Ethiopian pilots faced. They jumped too early to cut out electrical power to the tail, but then found the manual wheel jammed. Boeing needed to provide much more detail than they did about this procedure. It needed more explicit warnings about what could go wrong. If Boeing had done so, the MAXes could have kept flying safely.
BJORAMBRA says, hi Dominic. What's your background? Are you a pilot or a journalist that's passionate about, assigned to this beat?
Seattle to Mess Newsroom replies, I'm a journalist who loves this beat. I am not a pilot.
Gone79 says, what are your thoughts on safety self-certification as a general process? Can regulatory agencies and manufacturers be trusted with this responsibility?
Seattle to Mess Newsroom replies, it is actually necessary to have a huge element of the certification done by the manufacturer, in this case Boeing, the true subject matter experts who are working at the cutting edge of whatever the technology is are inside the company. The government engineers within the FAA don't have the same expertise. However, that said, it seems to me that the crucial element is then independent oversight of Boeing's certification work. That seems to have been inadequate in the case of the MAX and indeed even in the case of the previous new jet, the 787. FAA oversight needs tightened. The pressured atmosphere within the FAA, with managers pushing to meet Boeing's schedule, which I described in this story, is not the way to ensure safe, independent oversight.
Deleted, says, deleted.
Seattle to Mess Newsroom replies, I haven't come across anything similar, and I have to say that I struggle to understand the design decisions on that flight control system. The biggest mystery is why it was designed to be activated by a single sensor. I haven't heard any plausible explanation from Boeing.